Okay, welcome to this event by the Center for Philosophical Studies of History. My name is Georg Gandhi. I'm the Center's coordinator, and I will also be today's moderator. More importantly, today's speaker is our visiting scholar, Julita Slipkauskaitė, who sits to my left, but will get up soon, I think, to do her talk, she told me, with the topic Ockham and Paris Ockhamists towards a new approach to the study of late medieval philosophy. Julita is a postdoctoral assistant at Vilnius University in Lithuania. Her main research interests lie in late medieval philosophy, the philosophy and methodology of the history of philosophy, I think both of which will be topics of today, if I understand her title correctly, and also the philosophy of science and conspiracy theories. Julita's most recent publications include Reduction for Historians of Science from 2023, and It Spreads Like a Disease, Pandemics and Conspiracy Theories, both published from 2022. Both published in the journal Philosophia Sociologia. This is our last event before the well-deserved summer break. Our research seminar will come back in September, probably with a talk about colligations, but more information about the whole seminar and also the September session will be published in August on our homepage. If you want to stay updated about our activities, please consider following our social media. We have Facebook and X, formerly Twitter. If you want to become a visiting scholar, just as Julita is at the moment, please check out our homepage. All the information is there, and I think we are very welcoming. And if you want to speak in our seminar too, in the autumn session, as Julita does now, but we also do fully online sessions, only on Zoom, then please contact us too, and we will try to make that happen. We still have some slots available for the autumn seminar. Now, before I give the word to Julita, a few technicalities. I will forcibly mute online for the time of the talk. This is just because we have a big speaker here in the middle of the room to avoid any unnecessary disturbance. But worry not, after the talk, I will set online free again, and you can personally participate in the discussion, obviously. After the talk, there will be a discussion session I will moderate. We will discuss this and alternate between online and offline. Especially for the online folk, please indicate first so in the chat that you would like to talk. I will make a speakers list then. And when it's your turn, you can either speak up with or without your microphone on, or you can write a question in the chat, and then I will read it out loud. And I give the word now to Julita. That should work. I'll just share your presentation and mute online in a second. Yes. Okay, I think.
I like the emblem.
Yes, I think now we should be fine.
It's cool.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for such a warm introduction, and of course for the opportunity to host me at the university on rather a short notice, I guess, at least not half a year in advance. But so I'm very happy to present you my work, which is based on my dissertation that I have defended in September last year. The dissertation had the same name, Ockham and Paris Ockhamists towards a new approach to the study of late medieval philosophy. But I've received a lot of feedback from medievalists. I've received feedback from philosophers of historiography on the continental side, received some feedback from philosophers of science, but I've never received any feedback from philosophers of history on the analytical side. So I thought it would be the best place to do that would be Aulu. And what's regarding the emblem of my university, it's from several years ago when it celebrated its anniversary there. So currently I am an assistant doctor at Vilnius University, but I'm also looking for postdoc programs and projects where could I continue to pursue my interests, and maybe the development of this project could become part of that in the future. So, okay, now it's not working.
Try it.
During the event, okay.
Is it because it's shared or something?
You need to activate the window, maybe. Sometimes.
Oh yes, you're right. Sorry, please. Yes.
Sometimes this.
Yeah,
Okay, so I hope it's okay with the view and everything. I prefer to stand. So the problem that I was dealing and I would like to continue to be dealing with is that one of the problems that has been expressed in one of the main works on late medieval philosophy, the Cambridge companion to it, like the Cambridge History of Late Medieval Philosophy. So in 1982, historiographers of medieval philosophy, they kind of started pursuing this new way of how should medieval philosophy be done. So instead of kind of self-explanatory historical studies, they decided that it would be nice and productive to start pursuing also to analyze the links. How could medieval philosophy be linked to contemporary philosophy, but not only kind of read contemporary concepts into medieval philosophy, which would be considered anachronistic, but to also, but rather bring out, relearn the past concepts, past ideas, and bring them to today's context and see where they get us, whether they help us develop some kind of ideas. This was based on two main approaches that also exist in the general philosophy of historiography. So the historical approach and the analytic approach. This division is kind of debatable, I guess, but on the grounds that historiographers of medieval philosophy highly use it and they support their work based on this division, I included it. So I guess historical could be described as the way of study history of philosophy for its own sake and on its own terms. This way, historiographers are able to preserve its specific character, even when the problems of interest in the figures in the history have since fallen off the philosophical agenda. So this is like rather a famous description by McIntyre. And then the analytic side, there is a good description in a book which was dedicated to early modern thought, so not medieval, but also the one that specializes in some period in history of philosophy. So the analytic should be described as the approach that philosophy is presupposed as a source of ideas and arguments that may be useful for current debates that are happening. So kind of has an heuristic value, I guess. So this, of course, is debatable and has been debatable, but yeah, again, historiographers tend to still use this division. Of course, probably the biggest name that has emphasized it was Rorty with his texts, like 4 types of 4 genres. So with this, we start seeing some kind of a paradox that is happening among medieval historiographers and general historiographers of philosophy. So they would say like the general idea is that there is little consensus of what historiography of philosophy should serve within philosophy as a whole and what its relation to contemporary philosophy should be, whether it's purely historical or this analytical. However, the integration of late medieval philosophy to contemporary philosophy is being actively practiced. We could even say that it has been kind of on the agenda for at least like past 100 years, because medievalists, they are very interested in bringing like the good name for medieval philosophy back within the grander narrative of history of philosophy. However, there isn't much that is done with regards with the theoretical foundation of how should this pursuit be done. It's just being done, it's actively practiced, but there aren't many theoretical foundations for it. So the core question for me was, so how should the contemporary philosophy learn from history of philosophy and vice versa, or be informed by it? So I think I found that there could be 3 possible solutions. So there are possible solutions, and I think the third one is the best one, and this is something that I support in my work. So the first 2 are something that everyone is more familiar with. So the highly known, the division of labor account, and medievalists tend to follow it deliberately. So the division of labor account is the one that actually emphasizes the division that historians do the historical work and philosophers should do the philosophical work. So historians should be interested in medieval philosophy, but that's that. And analytic philosophers should be doing these relevance projects. They should be interested in how these past philosophical ideas could develop contemporary philosophical ideas. The second option is kind of happening on the continental side, I guess. So historicity is the main property of history of philosophy or philosophy. So what is philosophy and what is history of philosophy should not be excluded from one another. But it changes then the notion of history and philosophy. So I don't know how that could relate to this type of project, and it's not being like developed very actively. So I never kind of discussed this one. And the third way to integrate the two, as I suggest, could be the theory structuralism, which kind of had its heyday in the 80s in Frankfurt. However, there is like this famous Finnish philosopher, Veikko Rantola, who has a few papers on it as well. So he was also dealing with the structure of a scientific theory. So my idea is to adapt theory structuralism, which is originally meant for philosophy of science, for the structure of it and its development. I defend the idea that it could be adopted for the history of philosophy as well, and it could be a good tool to integrate the past and the present philosophical issues. So I came up also with a prototypical resolution. What could it look like beforehand, before any analysis has began? So let's say it would mean to resolve this tension. It would mean to convincingly argue for the reconciliation between late medieval thought and the contemporary philosophy. And with convincingly, I mean non-arbitrarily, which is, again, it introduces many more issues there, but we'll talk about it later, I hope. Yeah, so this integrated historiography of late medieval philosophy should be understood as an approach to doing the history of philosophy, which successfully incorporates considerations from contemporary analytic philosophy and an approach to doing contemporary philosophy in a way that successfully incorporates considerations from the history of philosophy. So a mutual relation that does not leave out some kind of important aspects for one another. However, what are those important aspects? That's probably the core issue of my presentation today. So all of this stuff is a lot of methodological work and theoretical in more general terms, which historiographers of medieval philosophy and generally philosophers of historiography, they theorize about it, they write about it, they use these terms. However, when we go, there is the applied level as well, and when we reach historiographers of medieval philosophy, they also have their own idea. So I guess we're now narrowing down. Well, we started with the general philosophical background, and now we're going to how do medievalists imagine what it is that they should be doing in this type of projects. So one of those medievalists is Claude Panaccio, a very well regarded medievalist, and he had at the time a paper on methodology, how to bring past philosophical ideas to contemporary framework. So the paper is like 7 pages long. It's not long at all, but since then he has also written a book on it. But I find that the book has also, it did not explain the questions that I would like to raise right now. So his main idea was that, well, and I also will only introduce you to this one. There are more, but like generally the situation is that they're not like rigorously developed. Medievalists would here and there explain something about their methodological decisions and how they tend to think, but there isn't much that you could say that is original to the topic or kind of differs significantly from the general discourse about historiography. So I will introduce you, like I will cover only this one today. So Panaccio has like a 3-step methodology, very simple at a glance. So he says that there are 2 types of sentences that historiographers develop. So R-type sentences, reference, and then the second one will be the I-type sentences, so the sentences of inferences. So the first step when a historiographer is met with a paper from the past, or with the text, is to develop these R-type sentences which connect the non-theoretical terms of the original text with ordinary objects that the historians and her readers are familiar with. So those R-type sentences, they refer to things that we already are familiar with. You are working outside of the text that you have been studying. They only happen in the context of just general concrete terms. They are not considered a part of philosophers' thought system, for example. They just help us connect the same, like identify the objects that we would identify in our everyday lives anyways, with the same type of objects from the past. Then the second type of sentences are the sentences that require you to know very well a philosopher's theory, or you have to have their texts read, and you could explain, let's say, how metaphysical ideas play for, let's say, Aquinas or some other philosophers, other ideas. Like you have to know their system of thought in order to produce I-type of sentences. So they express the capacity of evaluating inferential connections involving text vocabulary, and for evaluating them from the very point of view of the theory expressed in the text. So you are speaking from the reference of the text that you have been reading, and you are trying to kind of find the same equivalence, I guess, within the contemporary context. And there is another division that is also quite important: inter-theoretical inferences and extra-theoretical inferences. So again, intra-theoretical are the inferences that are done within the system of thought. And extra-theoretical, they involve also non-theoretical terms, like the R-type of sentences, but they are not dealing with like everyday objects. They are dealing still with concepts that we are interested in, whether they were Aquinas concepts or I don't know, our today concepts. And then the third step is translation by subordination. So Panaccio admits of himself that he, in his method, is Ockhamist, and the object of his study is Ockham. So he is, as a philosopher, he likes Ockham very much, and so it's his method as well as his object of study. So to translate terminology by subordination means to be able to compare 2 terms that come from the past to the present and to be able to translate them correctly. Nobody knows what correct is. At least Panaccio does not explain that. But once you do it, you no longer have to do it again. It should be somehow, it should spread within the scientific community that this is what matter is, this is what form is, this is how we translate it. So 3 steps, you would say, and Panaccio continues explaining how should they be done? And of course, he deals a little bit with the problem of perennial philosophical issues or trans-temporally philosophical issues. However, he still remains with the idea that the question of how one or the other philosophical question becomes interesting to us is a very interesting question, but he never deals with it explicitly. So this is a passage where he says that, yeah, maybe these 3 steps are very good, but of course they're not enough to understand why some philosophical phenomena are relevant today. It is not enough that past theoretical development should deal somehow with objects that we are familiar with. They must have to do with what we take to be philosophy. So the notion of philosophy from our point of view is something different than it could have been 700 years ago, let's say. And the last sentence, it was an important step to realize how past philosophies can be understood to have something to do with the world we live in, but we must go further. So no explicit explanation. So what makes a particular philosophical text relevant today? However, I think this is the key question to answer in order to produce a good integrated philosophy, like medieval philosophy. Because didn't add here, but because these appropriationists, they tend to kind of get into some kind of misconceptions due to their leaning to, like, on the one hand, they are leaning towards this universal grammar, let's say. They have this ideas and rules, how should, what term should be translated into which term. And he does base his idea on the fact that there must be context-independent philosophical issues. He wouldn't say that they're universal or they would have like a metaphysical status, but he would say that they're just perennial, and that's it. That's what has been interesting to us since the very beginning of philosophy until today, and that will be interesting to us many more years from now. So that's one claim he does, but on the other hand, he also keeps this paradigm view to philosophy as well. So there are shifts according to Panaccio, why philosophy changes, why how the things that we consider philosophically important right now, they are different from what they used to be, and it is it's not a happy instance that we are now very much interested in medieval philosophy. It's because our current notion of philosophy is very similar to what medievals used to think about it. So you could find these inconsistencies in Panaccio and in other appropriationists, where they kind of have premises that are considered to be contradictory to one another, on at least from the philosophy of science point of view. So that was my criticism to him. And then there is like another level to this whole problem, is what is it that medievalists actually practice? Because they write theories and then they practice medieval philosophy, and you don't always find their theoretical ideas represented in their practical work, I guess, which is also a bit like lacking, I believe, because I did have to kind of put a lot of interpretation to what is it that they're actually doing, because most of them have not dedicated a lot of work to methodology. So there is this problem set. So a few years ago, medievalists found out that maybe Ockham's idea of mental language could be similar to Fodor's language of thought hypothesis. And since then, they have been raising this question. So are they the same? Maybe is mental language a predecessor to Fodor's language of thought hypothesis? Can we derive one from the other, or how should we relate them? Is it historically okay to reconstruct the history of language of thought hypothesis, beginning with Ockham? Because Ockham is considered to be the first one who gave a systematic understanding to it. So both of them seem, at the first glance, they seem similar. They both are dealing with our mental processes. They both are working as a hypothesis, as a premise that we have to keep in order to, on Fodor's side, to explain how people learn language, and on Ockham's side, the function of mental language is not that clear. It's a matter of debate. So it could be that if you keep with this hypothesis, you, on the one hand, you disclose the ontological commitment for the connotative terms. And the theory of connotation is yet another problem that derives from this question. And yeah, so historiographers of medieval philosophy have mainly asked these 4 questions to, like, 3 questions to answer the first question, like the 4th one for them. So is there synonymy in Ockham's connotation theory? What is the function of mental language? And is mental language actually ideal or not? All of these are a matter of ongoing debate until now, and they are, I guess, depending on the scrutiny of how hard you debate, researchers tend to come to different conclusions. However, it seems that what they tend to do is to base their decision whether the 14th century idea is similar to Fodor's or not. They base their decision on this amount of similarities between the two. If they find that the mental language had some kind of similar function in Ockham's philosophy to Fodor's, then they say, yeah, we can derive Fodor's language of thought hypothesis from Ockham's. Maybe Ockham is the predecessor. But once again, then they never deal with the question, so how could Ockham's idea develop today's Fodor's idea? Or how could it help us kind of in the psychology of recognition, let's say? So this is how they tend to approach, whereas their method it discusses completely different things. It never talks about the amount of similarities, let's say, or they tend to, on the methodological level, medievalists tend to deal with this issue like philosophically. They pose perennial problems, paradigm shifts, universal language, stuff like that. But on the practical level, it all boils down to just the amount of similarities and differences. So they tend to kind of forget their objective. I feel like that's at least the conclusion I have done previously. So what we get after this multiple levels of problem sets is a multidimensional beast, as I called it. It's a chimera on the right side in the picture. So it's not a beast actually, but no, don't mind that. So this problem, it crosses the philosophy of historiography, then it crosses the practice of medieval philosophy, but also I think it's relevant to analytic philosophy of history, philosophy of science, and analytic philosophy, which all have gone through their own terms in like 70s, let's say, more or less. However, historiography of late medieval philosophy has never gone through any type of shift. It still keeps the dichotomy between philosophy and the history of philosophy intact. It still supports it, which would mean that on the one hand, they would say that what is their pursuit is historical, whilst on the other hand, they would call it analytic pursuit, a philosophical one, which also implies that it's kind of not susceptible to the changes of time and context. So they still keep this dichotomy up, whereas other fields that are relevant to this one have moved somewhere. I haven't covered the first sentence that I wrote in the slide, so I don't know if I have to, but an additional problem, an additional unease that medievalists have actually shown, and it also, again, it proves that this issue needs to be resolved, is the one that, like, for the past, like, you could easily say 100 years, but in the past 50 years, they have really shown that they would like to prove that medieval philosophy actually matters, and it does matter to contemporary philosophy. So not only by writing articles, like monographs are being dedicated to this topic as well. So this issue should be going somewhere. Hopefully it will in the nearest future. So in my dissertation and today, I would still defend 3 claims that successful reconciliation is feasible between the 2 programs, but a methodological consideration is necessary for it, and we somehow need to reconcile this appropriationist and contextualist approach. And a successful method for this integrated approach, the third way, it should address the tensions between the 2 without encountering contradictions that were present in Panaccio's work. So one of the, like, two aims, 2 claims are a bit of a side note, I guess, that appropriationists, they tend to have some inconsistencies in their arguments, so that needs to be fixed. And those inconsistencies are solved by the analysis or inter-theory relations. This is my idea, that's my claim, that they could be solved, at least in theory. And that would enable us to close the supposed gap between philosophy and history of philosophy, between that which is considered purely historical and the one that is considered purely ahistorical. And that should result in a reconciliation. And the third claim is that the paradigm model of scientific development is not apt for composing either an appropriationist or an integrated historiography of medieval philosophy. On the third claim, I should elaborate a bit more, I believe, if I have time. Or maybe later we will discuss this, I think. Okay, so my solution was to take this rather forgotten school, which started in Munich, structuralists, and Lawrence Kruger wrote this paper defending the idea that the analysis of inter-theoretic relations should help reconstruct scientific development. However, my suggestion is that we should adapt it for the historiography of philosophy, especially for these relevance projects. So if you look at the table on the right, like this column of letters, so these structuralists, what they like to do, they draw long lists of how could one theory bear, what type of relation can one theory bear to another theory. And usually those theories, they don't have to be going chronically. They could reside at the same time, just be competitors. However, there are several types. Nowadays, if a paper is written on this, there you would find like 20 types of relations that could prevail between theories. So my general idea was to kind of think of a past philosophical system or idea as a mathematical one, the same as it is considered here from the structuralist vein, and imagine it as imagine a philosophical idea as a structuralist would imagine it, as an open-ended and ever-evolving complex of many interrelated parts. So if we adopt this understanding of a philosophical theory, which Panaccio and other historiographers would, I think, be sympathetic to, because they discuss the importance of context, the importance of factual, like what in fact do you know, or what is missing from the philosophical writings that we're interested in. So what type of notions we have to add in. So they discuss these things anyways, but what they miss all the time is the normative aspect of historiography, I guess. This normative aspect is much better developed in philosophy of science. So what they miss is to discuss or explain how philosophers find that this particular problem is important for this particular period, or based on their notion of what it is that they do as maybe a community or a philosopher today, how could they pick what is important to be picked from Ockham or Buridan. That's this structuralist agenda idea. It could just help out historiographers of medieval philosophy fill in to have a more elaborate view to what they do, like be more holistic, but at the same time not to be reductive, like too reductivist, and also too only like narrativist, because structuralism encourages to think of any kind of theory as it is still developing, still changing, and a theory not as something that is just has a static structure and that's it, but you should consider it in its process, in its current status, knowing that it will probably change in the future. So by the analysis of the intertheoretic relations, we are able to have one theory would be better to, it could help justify, guide, or provide postulates for the later theory. So on the left side of the screen in the table, you could see that the medieval theories could provide all of these functions for the later ones, but it should be done by the analysis of intertheoretic relations. And what is avoided is on the right side of the table. So we avoid the reductivism claim that reduction usually between theories, it used to be claimed that it would culminate in a law-like relation, or that you would, I guess, reach the scientific parsimony if the new theory was completely reducible to the old, which historians disagree with. They had serious arguments against something like this. However, this analysis of an intertheoretic relations, it avoids all of these disadvantages. So my conclusions were about the fact that the integration is actually feasible. And I did some remarks about the situation between contextualism and appropriationism within medieval historiography. However, I think the more important thing now is to cover a little bit about the criticism that I received during my defense from the committee members. So they suggested me that I should develop the project a bit more, and they kind of gave few ideas. Like they gave one idea, but I have two more. So I think number one should be done anyways. So one of the main points was that I have a theoretical framework, I have a logical model. How should medieval philosophy be brought to the contemporary one, but I've never written an application to it. So one of the suggestions was to take the computational theory of mind and to see whether it's compatible with Ockham's and Buridan's concepts of mental language. And the requirement is to achieve non-trivial results, which was one of the aims of my work as well. The second option was actually one that I dropped during the early stages of my dissertation. So during an internship in the Netherlands with historians of like medievalists and historians of philosophy, they suggested that I could maybe conduct some interviews with the historiographers who actually do this work, but have never written like methodological work. So by conducting some interviews, asking like what it is that you do and why do you do it and how do you base it like philosophically, I could at least have a bigger sample of text to work with. And then, of course, turn to scientometrics to expand again the procedures and the hypotheses that medieval historiographers work with. And the third one is something that brought me here, of course, to have a better theory in the analytic philosophy of history, because what I have noticed I've never had a training in it, but like all the texts that I had read, I noticed that analytic philosophy of history tends to work with something that is understandable from the empirical point of view, I believe, like history that you would intuitively think of it, like history of war maybe, or dealing with some relicts or some findings at least, whereas history of philosophy does not necessarily deal with that, except from texts. Like that's the only empirical thing to have. So maybe there is a better theory for it, a better than intertheoretic relations, the analysis of intertheoretic relations. And of course, theory that proposes neither reductionism nor narrativism, because those two tend to not be sufficient for the integrated approach. So I will welcome your insight and questions to what you've heard, and yeah, a discussion is very much wanted. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I will unmute online now, so I think it's easiest if we take the first question from the room. Anybody here immediately want to get in? Okay, well, we can also open it for, yes, David has one, so let me just, okay, David, you can go. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Thank you very much.
Okay, Julita, thank you very much. For me, it was very interesting. I will definitely need to listen to it again. I was actually interested in the topic many, many years ago. You introduced me to many, many new writers I didn't know about. In general, I think when I was doing this work on intellectual history, on history of philosophy, I think the one writer that actually gave me the most insight into the problem was Martial Guerrero, French historian of philosophy. I
Oh.
can send you some of his texts. His texts are, for example, in English, you can find History of Philosophy as a Philosophical Problem. It's very good text. One thing I actually like about it, it's text from 1969, but in some respect, it's very similar to, for example, Jouni-Matti Kukanen's position in philosophy of history or historiography, because he actually notes that we should treat any history of philosophy as some part of argument. It always when you, for example, decide to say that this philosophical conception is just a part of history and this is still a useful concept for us today, this is already some argument you are making, and this argument could possibly reflect some of your background assumptions or biases. So basically, yeah, even as I said, trying to find something useful in medieval philosophy for the philosophy today is interesting. I have my doubts about that, though it certainly people should develop some arguments about it. You know that I work with a lot of historians of medieval philosophy in Ostrava. You may remember some of them.
Yeah.
Actually, most of them are actually on the way. Like I know, for example, Marek Gotisk. If you remember him, he always tells like that he likes doing medieval philosophy because it reminds him of analytic philosophy. It's really the philosophy, you really clarifying concepts and trying to do some research. But at the same time, Marek Otis is also saying, I'm just a historian of philosophy. I'm not doing real philosophy by doing this. So I know that maybe in general, I think what I would maybe try reading Martial Guerrero, maybe try to think about the idea that always doing history of philosophy is always an argument in philosophy in some way, as he is proposing. Otherwise, yeah, I know that this was mostly a comment, not a question, but you were asking what do we think, and my first thought went to actually Martial Guerrero's papers. Sorry.
Marcelio who?
I'm sorry?
What's the surname?
I will send you the paper in the chat, or I can send you by email as well.
Yeah,
we can see. Do you want to answer anything that or?
I thought that maybe the surname is Mayaru.
I think my pronunciation of French is horrible. So
Yeah, I read some papers by him, but I'm now not sure whether it's the same person you're talking about, because he had some work on the. Oh no, okay, that's a different name. Okay.
Martial Guerrero.
Okay, definitely. I'll check.
yeah.
Yes. Right, Jouni-Matti, another question, but is there in the room first? Since we usually alternate. But you can think some more. I would have some questions, but let's first, Jouni-Matti, you go.
Right. Thank you, and sorry for not being there, but obviously I'm a bit ill. But it was well worth listening to this talk of yours. I have three kinds of questions, but I go only with one now. Maybe I return later. And the first one is what well, the first is the comment on that there is also a similar discussion in history and philosophy of science, and where they try to integrate history and philosophy of science. There are very similar discussions in terms of whether the philosophical approach and historical approach will always stay apart, and most seem to think that they do. And there's a lot of this kind of failing marriage language there.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the options you showed in the beginning was history for philosophical purposes or something like that. So there's actually Jutta Shikore has suggested that also in HPS. So that's just an idea. Also, Kuhn was already keen on Stegmüller and I think Kruger as well. I'm not sure about the latter. But I like this approach because it sort of reminds of going a little bit back of this dynamic approach to theories and scientific change or change in thinking anyway, which are not practiced so much. So I like this. But my question now on the first kind of question is, what's really what are you really aiming at? What's the purpose of this? Why, if I propose why pluralistic option wouldn't be possible? Is it that the people are really aching to see medieval philosophy useful somehow? And okay, that you can get answers why it could be useful for philosophy or for something else. But then I guess the counter answer, as in HPS, is often that, okay, fine, and I'm sure you can do that, but then it's not history research proper anyway, because history research comes with different points of views and maybe different methods, and it just works around differently. So why not pluralism? Why do you need to get one approach going specifically?
Yeah, the side topic I've never discussed. So the whole problem is set actually between those who identify themselves as historians, so let's say pure medievalists, and between those who identify themselves as philosophers who just stumbled, they were doing analytic philosophy, but they have just stumbled upon medieval things, and now they see that it's actually really relevant. They want to do medieval philosophy, and it's like funded very well. Let's say that's actually the case. So those historians, like pure historians, they would say that appropriationists, all they do is just arbitrary actions. They pick whichever things work. They kind of take ideas out of their own context, switch them up so that they were actually working, and that's the new philosophy for you. And they call it like Ockham or Buridan, whereas a historian would say that it's not completely Ockham, this is not completely Buridan, it's a matter of debate. So we had a very serious error in the history of these things. So there is this Paul Vincent Spade, who is the author of Companion to Ockham, like Cambridge Companion. And there he did like a very critical error interpreting, reading contemporary ideas into Ockham and making his connotation theory fail. And this, because medieval science was done like this, because connotation theory fails, then Ockham's natural philosophy fails, then his mathematical philosophy fails, and stuff like that. So due to this, probably just an error, but what they called it was like this, the outcome of this appropriationism. You make like the medieval philosopher sound like he was ultimately contemporary, where he actually wasn't, and it's against the benefit of that medieval philosopher. So it has been criticized like very much, and yeah, so errors like that have occurred previously, and I guess pluralism just this, yeah, the notion, like the environment that everything you do is just arbitrary choice. That's what historians are not happy about. I don't know what I think about it myself. I don't mind. I mean, I am a methodological pluralist myself. So,
but in this case, you want to integrate the two sides, the historians and the, so that
both
the account will be historically, fair, accurate, and also philosophically, contributing or something like that.
Yes.
Okay, it's very similar in HPS, the discussions there.
To do this across the Atlantis, they told that this is also an existential problem right now for history of philosophy departments in the state. If you fail to prove that it's relevant to contemporary philosophy, you go to history department. You're no longer philosopher, you're historian. So that's also kind of this political side of it, which is, I guess, pressing as well.
Okay. We're back to, I mean, you can ask some more questions later. We're back to the room now.
I just want to say that thank you for the presentation, and I'm sorry I need to leave for the next
Okay,
meeting.
thank you for coming.
Well,
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I jump in for the room. I have also some relates to what Joni-Matti said, if I may. One more thing about making philosophy, historiography useful for philosophy. Joni-Matti mentioned Jutta Schickower, I think.
Mhm.
Hans Chang has tried to say
Yeah,
something similar
so-
before. So you probably know him, or you want to look at him.
Yeah, and
That was not my question, but you could still answer. if you want.
I've looked at them both already.
Yeah. But I also have two questions. Maybe I have more, but two for the moment. One is also what Joni-Matti started with, the pluralism and the relationship between modern philosophy and perhaps the history of philosophy, like modern science and history of science. You gave us the goal, reconciliation.
Mhm.
This is a pretty loaded, or a pretty strong term. It's a pretty high goal too. I don't exactly mean what it means, but reconciliation sounds to me like all issues are mended and people come together again and they form a whole again. And that would be not a pluralist position. But maybe the question is, can you explain what you mean by reconciliation? Because there are many other uses that the history of philosophy could for contemporary philosophy as well. It could be, for instance, some sort of relevance. For relevance, you have to specify for what and by what criteria. It could be inspiration. It could be a lot of other stuff. It could be not interest in itself. So the first question is, what does reconciliation mean here? And then the second is, of course, because your project, or the understanding is, it's about the relationship between the history of philosophy and contemporary philosophy. So in a sense, it's really a meta-philosophical project. How do they sort of relate to each other? And then you have your inter-theoretic view, which I find this one very interesting. I want to hear more about that. But the second question is more like, and that seems to be also maybe rub the historians of philosophy the wrong way, is the actual historiographic question the least interesting one? So the actual historiographic question is, or for most people, the actual historiographic question, okay, this is what Ockham meant. This is his works, maybe because in medieval philosophy you have a certain amount of manuscripts, there are not too many to go around, so maybe specialists can read them all. We have an understanding what they meant, and then we have certain influence that might be a bit unclear, but you know this. And then the actual historiographic question between Ockham and Fodor would be, did Fodor know about Ockham, and if so, where did he read it? And if he knew about it, then his theory could have been influenced by him. Otherwise, it's a double invention somehow, you know? That's the actual historiographic question. But maybe it seems like most people, at least to do analytic philosophy nowadays, they take the historiographic question perhaps for granted, or they read their own doubtful stuff into it, and then they want to know which one is correct, or how do you know what I mean? So I guess the second question is the historiography the least interesting part for you, or for generally? Because the actual historiography, I mean, historians do great work to really find out what these historical actors mean and who influenced whom, and you know all this. But that's the historiography question.
Yeah.
The rest is the philosophy or whatever else you call it. So this is the question for the moment.
Okay. By the first question, so yeah, now I see that there is this piece of work that I haven't covered, but it produces questions. So reconciliation was to kind of help those who are interested primarily in history and those who are interested in philosophy talk to each other. Because the debate is only one-sided. It's appropriationists tend to do what they want to do, this like arbitrary moves. And then it's historians who are, let's say, are annoyed at those appropriationists. But the debate, and they criticize them. They criticize for arbitrarity, for contemporary terminology, and things like that. But the appropriationist part would never respond. They would never say, yeah, okay, I was wrong, or defend their methodological choices. So it's just a one-way conversation, it feels like. So reconciliation was like on this empathetical side as well, that both sides, both disciplines should talk to each other more. And maybe this method, it's naive maybe to say something like this, because by applying the method, it's not necessary that you will receive a particular result, but at least by highlighting the issues, not only on the sociological level, but on the philosophical, look, that your non-existing dialogue is due to, in part, on the non-existing methodology as well. So by fixing that, I would hope that this would mean to reconcile specialist with a specialist, like maybe that's not a good word for it, I don't know, but yeah, so that's the answer. And for the second question, to me, the division between history and philosophy is the least interesting question, actually. Historiographical question is interesting question. And I think that I haven't gone that far as to make this philosophical statement, like what is the difference between history and philosophy. That's a bit, I don't know. I really wanted to deal with this practical problem, and that's it, and use philosophical arguments for it. But to kind of, I think my work is rather based on a pre-existing some kind of notion of where's the difference between history and philosophy, and I don't necessarily deal with this question. I think what I did stems out of from the position.
David raised his hands, but I just give a very short comment on, because you want the reconciliation issue, they talk to each other. Hermann Powell has a text about Hermann Powell on history and philosophy of history as his understanding, like HBS, that sort of stuff. And he conceives that philosophers and historians talk to each other as a hermeneutic space, where they try to get to know each other and understand each other. You need dialogical values, virtues, and so on. You might be interested in that.
Okay, cool.
I can give you the reference, because I think what you are aiming at squares very much with what he says. Maybe yes.
Okay, cool.
Here's another term of reconciliation for that. But David,
thank you.
next. Unless there's, is there in the room anybody? Are you? No. Okay. Then David is next. Again.
Okay, so finally, more specific question now, hopefully. Because you're still proposing that you would like to continue your research, you would like to study how historiographers of philosophy really write, how do they compose their work, which is, I think, very good project. I think stick to it. But at the same time, you know, people you mentioned, there were people who are making works on like Ockham and important figures of medieval thought. But there are also many others unknown scholars and philosophers, and there are also historiographers of medieval thought who are dealing with unknown dissertations, who are scouring the archives for texts of mostly unknown authors now. And that's actually also the topic in Richard Rorty's paper, 4 Genres of Historiography of Philosophy, where he actually writes about the need for criticize the canon and to introduce more heroes, air quotes. So in general, do you think there is it could also connect to Garth's questions, because if we look for something important for our philosophy, then we perhaps stick to the figures we know well, who are canonical figures, or should we do it more historical? And you know, every piece of data, of historical data, every document deserves the same, let's say, focus. We should go through the all material regardless of canon of philosophical thought. What do you think? So should we criticize canon? Should we introduce? Should we stick with important figures? Yes, like Ockham.
I guess I am. Yeah. On the one hand, I would love to say that we should criticize the canon, but I think that the way to do it is to reapproach it, I guess, but not to revise it. But maybe I was thinking, but this is now it's not based on anything. It's just my dreams, I guess. Like, how would this method, if developed, how could it function actually within historiographers? Let's say they at least read it or know about it and agree at least to some statements. So maybe it could function later on to also develop this interest in less known figures and try to relate them to today's philosophical concerns. So I guess my idea was to do the work on the major philosophers, like two, Ockham and Buridan, develop a tool, and then this tool could be applied on a grander scale, but probably to pre-modern theories. But that's just like out of my head completely. I've been thinking about it, but again, that's just my thought. I don't really know how does it have much ground, or how would that actually go, like materialize. But yeah, I think maybe why not? As many things that could be done, they should be done. So
Okay, unless we have more time, of course, but Barish wanted to.
Yeah, well, first of all, we would like to thank you for this presentation. I would ask some questions, but now I'm feeling a bit dizzy and cannot get my head together. So, with your permission, I need to lay down a little bit.
Okay. It's okay. Yeah, good. Get well soon. The presentation is there? Huh? Is there? Well, I would have some more questions, but is there?
well, I'm wondering, what do you think about this approach that is completely taken from philosophy of science? It's also forgotten. Actually, a pupil of Sok Chang has been developing it a little bit, but it's like it's two people in Europe who do this stuff. So would you see a prospect to still keep continuing this inter-theoretic relations, the analysis of them, and apply it for the history of philosophy? Is that crazy or not? Because I see it fitting very well. And I see that historiographers of medieval philosophy, they like theories in philosophy of science. They often refer to Kuhn, they refer to paradigms, they refer to some theoretical terms, like inter-theoretical, extra-theoretical. Like Panacho uses this language anyways. I mean, I can see it overlapping, and I also made an argument in my dissertation that, yeah, exactly this happened in the history of natural philosophy, in the history of science, like the works that have been written, like on the threshold of exact science, for example, or the scholar Annelies Meyer was very famous, where she emphasized the importance of Buridan and Ockham for the emergence of exact sciences later on. So I kind of had this chapter about how this issue seems to be repeating again, but in the new field. It kind of started in the natural philosophy department, and now it's on the mental philosophy of on cognitive philosophy. Like it's just a different sphere, but the type of problem, the structure, how to coordinate the historical part with ahistorical part, that in principle is the same issue. So maybe the tools could also be the same. That's my thinking behind it, but yeah, I don't know. Should I change it or?
I had, yes. I think it's viable and interesting. Can I ask before that another question, and then I could come to the ways to proceed issue. I have some ideas of, I mean, how it could fit. But before that, I'm curious about the solution part. I don't remember the name who proposed it. That relies on the notion of reference to common objects or shared objects. And I guess my question is simply whether, because it's a sort of intuitive and kind of common sense and interesting, but then it can come across quite a lot of problems if you take it seriously, like literally, not serious, literally, like regarding theories of reference. that's another discussion. There's of course much literature, and what we find there, for example, is that it is actually rather complicated to fix references. So the old theory is descriptive theory of references, and then of course even it seems intuitive that yes, we know the objects were the same, but actually descriptions change. And when description change, then do the references change if the description fixes the reference? So that's the classic problem, all the way from Frege, Russell, and so on to Kuhn and theory change debates. And then there's the other, the big one that substituted is the causal theory of reference, where we find this causal link by ostensive definition, but thereby we would need something like essences. And usually it's applied to either persons or their natural kinds in the sciences. So I find that while I find it intuitive, I find potentially that it will be challenged unless there is some deeper theory. Okay, then my question is actually, what is the ground of suggesting, what is the sort of intellectual philosophical ground of suggesting this this kind of solution? Because then it also reminded me a little bit of when the split between theoretical and non-theoretical terms were introduced. It little bit reminded of a logical positivism, empiricism kind of approach, because obviously theoretical is another notion that has been proved to be very difficult to define with any kind of specificity, or maybe it doesn't matter. But this is my question, and then go to the quizzes.
The person who wrote it, Claude Panaccio, he's actually a specialist of Frege. He began by analytic philosophy and then turned to medieval philosophy. There's his biography. So for him, the reference, it's I mean, I could see it not functioning very clearly within his own system of thought, but from the perspective of analytic philosophy, theory of reference, never consider it. So yeah, that's a good thing to do. I will do that. That's a good idea. So his idea was, he puts it very, very boldly in his paper. He says, look, philosophy works the same way as our world works. If there is a house and it's built on a solid ground, if the ground is solid, it's solid 700 years ago, and now it's solid again. Like, we can judge it that it's solid. A house is a house, a ground is a ground. So he says that it's the same with the reference to philosophy. So, but again, no explanation there. So how do I know that I should be materia into matter? Like, how do I know? And then on top of that, he then also says, but also there are paradigms which embed our language, they embed our understanding of what philosophy is. But at the same time, there is this universal concept of how should I relate distant terms. So I put it as in a way that he subscribes to synonymy from the reductivist point of view. Nobody has ever made a comment on it, so I'm not sure whether it's a good idea or not. But yeah, that's my interpretation to him. Yeah, it could be problematic. Yeah, so that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
But he's definitely aware of these issues. He's a specialist.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, sister.
And what was the second question?
Yes, that's that. It's not a question really anymore. It's when you're asking about how to go further, just some ideas. I think this is my view. I think both the ideas of inferentialism, working about inferences or relations between expressions, and the idea of structuralism are very interesting. And when you postulated in the last slide ways to forward, you had three options. So I think I could see it being, well, from my point of view anyway, been an integration on or somewhere between 2 and 3, ways 2 and 3, and the idea is obviously as you fleshed out, you would need some kind of theory of concepts or something like that, and it's a bit difficult to come by. But what I have in my mind since really been wedded in Zellers and Brandom and neo-pragmatism, I think there's a functional theory of concepts which basically focuses on the role of an expression that it plays in this particular discourse or language. So if you can map the role, and then that would provide you a theory of concepts. And at the same time, I don't know how exactly to execute this, but then it would be also something that you'd be able to study either through digital scanning. I don't know, probably there isn't capability for that kind of thing. Although there are, of course, something also manually reading the text. So that's how I would imagine it being sort of getting to the point where you can understand the sort of concepts insofar as understand the inferential relations to closely related concepts, and then maybe highlight the differences between historical and contemporary concepts and the trajectories there. And to finish this is to many of us here have been thinking about this kind of empirical turn. So in fact, this actually would be another kind of turn where you would turn to studying the actual uses, or actually studying what you can find there in the history of philosophy. So I think, yeah, somehow see it well aligned what we have been talking here.
Okay, thank you. Seems like a very concrete suggestion. So concrete, no, it's not a word, but thank you. I will look into it. But this, yeah, my problem with philosophy of history was that all of the books are dedicated to studying something empirical, and I never knew if should I use it or shouldn't I? So what would be your standing on this?
Which books you mean? Because
I began by reading Paul Roth, and then I read some of your works, and then Ming, I think. But then I kind of gave up because I thought that I'm not working with empirical data, I'm working with ideas and concepts. But is that how it?
I don't, but can I disagree? I don't see any of those books empirical as such. They talk about empirical stuff, but none of them, basically none of them that I know, maybe historians of historiography have done any empirical stuff of how things matter. There are a lot of claims and ideas and intuitions and anecdotal information, what history writing is fundamentally. So that's one point. Another point from my perspective is that what are the concepts then? I mean, why would you not be able to study the manifestations of concepts? I mean, okay, if you're interested in the theory of concepts, then that's a theory thing, or philosophy theory thing. But if you are interested in how Ockhamians or whoever used it, and whether it's similar to whatever some debate in philosophy of mind, then I think we would need to go down through and see through this our theory of concept. So therefore, I think that would be empirical. In my category, it would come down as being a sort of empirical in the end.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know what I think about it, but I'll think.
Yeah.
I would have some more questions.
But when are you leaving, actually?
Tuesday morning. So Monday I will be here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not. I won't be able to come tomorrow and so on, but maybe on Monday, so we might
Yeah.
talk a little more.
But a short point again. Now you decided that you didn't find something useful. It reminded me when we had a speaker here before, even twice, who worked on something similar, Adrian Blow. He works on the history of political ideas and the history of political concept and the philosophy of political concepts. And he struggles with the same issue about the history of political concept and analytical political theory and so on. And he has papers on this and on the relationship too. So you might find some usefulness in that. Blow, like B-L-A-U, like blau, but it's blow. He's also very approachable, I'm sure if you write to him, he will. Yes, but what I actually wanted to say is, you were asking about whether this is a good way to approach it, this theory, structuralism, or what we call it. I don't know it well enough, so I can't say that. But I found it interesting. I found it in many ways fruitful, because it meant because the idea of translating concepts from one theory into another. But of course, one thing that struck me, of course, is and that might also what historians of philosophy perhaps don't like so much, or maybe they do. Of course, you call these things called philosophical position theories. So you have to have a theory, a concept of what a theory is, right? And that therefore, I just want to ask you, what is a theory? Because there's several. I mean, a theory is somehow always some form of interrelated claims with inferential relations between them other, maybe traditionally deductively, but maybe not. And it has some empirical subpart, right, that it relates to the world in some way, right? Maybe history, maybe philosophy works like that too. And since the only multi-mentioned pragmatism, his hobby horse, I'm going to mention something that I like. Your structuralism also has reminded me a lot about coherentism, which is a theory of justification of beliefs more than just that. But the way I think about it is also that you sort of, what a theory is, it's a form of, you have a lot of interrelated beliefs and they form a coherent whole more or less, and you justify them by each other in some form. So that's maybe useful to think about it that way, or look at it what it is, you know. But finally then, I have a question to sort of generally, do you think that your project of inter-theoretic translation holds the promise to come to sort of some form of criteria, or at least a method to find the relevance of form of philosophical theories for modern philosophical theories, and a form of relevance that is rational or epistemic, and not a form of relevance that is political or some sort of fact. You know, I mean, sexy topics that is uninteresting. These are all non-epistemic categories. You know, I mean, a lot of stuff is relevant nowadays because people find it relevant for whatever kind of reasons. But I think that your project holds the promise that if we could translate previous thoughts in a form to modern and see the similarity, then they're relevant in a way which is not necessarily historical, because they would be historically relevant if there was a relationship between them of influence, but relevance rationally, because this person already had the same thought, because they anticipated or whatever they would say. That was this promise, right? That's what I'm sure this was a question, but
so I'll begin by the last one because I forgot the other two. So the original theory, the original structuralists, they deal with scientific theories, and they would claim something like this. They would want to achieve at least a coherence between the theories, between the past theory and the current theory. If you find, if you analyze the relations that they are at least parts of the theories, you could at least establish coherence between them, which means that the later theory most probably has taken the successful parts of the previous theory, and those successful parts, they are now, like, the later theory is the result of those successful parts. They kind of are still present there, even though it has been 700 years, let's say. And Panaccio seems to be talking a little bit on these terms as well, because I think like historically oriented people, they always work on the ideal that ideas never emerge out of nowhere. They sort of have some kind of prehistory to them. So Panaccio likes this idea as well. He talks in these terms also, and that's why we are looking for some kind of reference, because we already know that the newer theory must be referenceable somehow to the past one. So they have the the premise, they hold to it that some kind of relation is there. It's our work if we successfully show that relation, that's the good reconstruction of the history of that idea. Whether my theory suggests that, I don't know. For example, with this Fodor and Ockham problem, it's actually the fact that Fodor never knew about this. And actually, after medieval period, mental language hypothesis somehow disappeared. Nobody's able to find who has developed it. So it's like we had this idea in the 14th century, and then out of the blue, Fodor came up with it. And they say that there is this gap, nobody knows why, but they still are searching for relation between the two theories. But then it must be that they're probably aiming at kind of forwarding, developing Fodor's idea. They're not looking for like history of this notion, history of this hypothesis. Okay, so that's a good question. I need to think about it more. Yeah. Then, what is a theory? Again, my understanding is scientific. It comes from philosophy of science. A theory is made out of many strings, interrelated parts, and those parts, they are the norms of research. Then this other part, the actual content. Then another part is the, let's say, intellectual, cultural context that it has been developed in. Not much of it is rational, actually, I don't think. It's like probably laden by like norms of research. And again, historiographers of medieval philosophy, they would agree with this. They would think of a philosophical system having at least 4 parts: the content, the context, and they would say that there are norms, but they always ignore them. So yeah, that's another inconsistency that they tend to do. Yeah. And what was it was 2 or
Yeah, well, I just said, I mean, a lot of people say just very short things. Wouldn't it be better for thinking about inter-theoretic translation to think of theories as purely conceptual objects? I mean, they have a social impact and they have some norms that it's all fine. But those things don't translate to today anymore, right? What translates to today is, if at all, their contents, is that, or somehow not, all right? So it's about what could be old-fashionedly called the idea that is there, right? Not so the theories and the conceptual object of the well, it's the relations, the theoretical relation, whatever you call them, the basic relations that are asserted by the philosophical theory, and not their or maybe their core, if you like, with Lacan or something, not their whatever is around there, or because maybe it's just my misunderstanding, but it is the norms around there and the social context don't translate to today, right? There's no relevance to that level, is there?
Even if there was, I think we decide what is relevant right now. Yes. Like those who are diseased, they no longer decide this. So yeah, maybe that's not a very decisive question to solve. And yes, what they ultimately do is relate contents.
Yes.
Yeah, but then my issue was, so how do you decide what to take? Because content leads you to multiple interpretations of, it never leads you to only one idea. It can lead you to multiple at the same time with having the same evidence. Let's say, okay, now it's, and this happens with Ockham as well. Like, hence are these debates whether he has a ideal language or what's the point of connotation. What is its ontological commitment? Let's say they all disagree, they all know the same, they all have read the same texts. It still leads to multiple interpretations, and I don't know. And that's again the question of consensus, I guess. How do you develop it? So maybe content is not enough, and that was my criticism to Panaccio. Yeah, concepts. But maybe that's my problem. Maybe I should shift the perspective and see a better way out.
I mean, I would let David go.
No, we always put people first who haven't spoken yet. So you first and David.
Okay, so I want to give 2 disclaimers first. One of which is that I'm from a completely different field with no background in this whatsoever. So there's a lot of it that goes right over my head. And the second disclaimer is that I have my own methodological biases that are going to be coming into this.
Okay.
But I've been trying to think what other data could we use to kind of get at some of these questions in a historical context? Because if we're looking at Ockham and Fodor, for example, I'm assuming that there are a set of historians, historiographers who have kind of done that analysis. They've used whatever information is available about the 2 of them, and that's it. That's what we have for the context. So as an exercise to use your tool, I'm wondering if there's something else that we could do where we could bring in more information. So what if, for example, we use 2 pairs of contemporary philosophers, where they're all still alive? And if you could find one philosopher who wrote something and a second person later who had read that and responded to it without really directly referencing it. And then you could talk to them and say, the second person, where were you developing your ideas from? You have this idea that's very similar to this other person, but you didn't read them. So where did your ideas come from? And you can talk to the person who wrote first and say, what did you think of this person who wrote afterwards? And what is the relation between the 2? Kind of get them to respond to one another. I think that's the less interesting question, but might still offer some relevance. I think the more interesting pair is to find someone where there's 2 theories that are similar, and the second person has read the first one, but does not explicitly refer to this. It's not saying that they're drawing on it explicitly. And so you can bring in the historical context of each one and actually interview them and say, what were you reading? Because we cannot do that with Fodor. We cannot do that with Ockham. To say, like, what were the people that you were reading? Where did these ideas come from? We have no idea. It's all ignorance. But if you can actually talk to the philosopher and say, where did your ideas come from? We can start to get a sense of how important is the historiography, which we don't know for Ockham, because we don't know if he invented it entirely himself, living in a cave, or if he was reading other things. If we talk to contemporary people, we can actually understand the full context of how important history is. The other thing that we can learn, potentially, is by talking to the first person, is to say, how do you feel that your ideas have been interpreted? If this was a big name in the field, and they wrote some seminal paper 50 years ago and this person is still alive, there have been other people writing about their work. Well, did they get it right? Did they mistranslate your ideas, your concepts? You meant it one way and now everybody's talking about it with this other thing, and the completely wrong reference is being used. Those details, I think, would be important for bringing together the historiography and the kind of analytical philosophy in a contemporary case. And that might give you some inference as to what degree does the historiography actually matter for the analytical philosophy of medieval texts. Again, this is like a completely different context, but as you're looking for ways to apply your tool, I'm wondering if you used modern cases, you might be able to use your tool and bring in other data to validate it in a way that we cannot with historical sources, because we have nothing else to draw on to validate it. You're still making your own references, your own inferences. And maybe there's something there that could be helpful in that process.
So that would validate my inference on the grounds that others had kind of provided me with what they think historiography is important for. And
to what degree the philosophies can build on one another, or can speak to one another? Can it work backwards? You know, I'm not a philosopher.
No, but this becomes then like this scientometrical research, because you really want to know how philosophy expands, how it develops, what does it mean to develop a philosophical idea? Yeah, so my initial answer would be that probably philosophers would not know the answers to these questions, and scientists, they have a lot of information and our decision apparatus, it's kind of imminent. You cannot explain yourself completely. That would be my position, but I've learned it from the books, so maybe it's not correct. So, yeah, why not? Probably. I was thinking about this, like senior professors who have done their lives research. If I interviewed them, then maybe they would feel more obligation to kind of sit down finally and think through your own methodological biases and explain them on paper. So at the end of your career, maybe, but I would hardly imagine it with like a younger scholar. I'm not sure. So this is what I was thinking when I was deciding maybe I should conduct interviews, like a deep analysis with one philosopher. Like I wanted to do 4 interviews, 2 with those who consider themselves historians, and 2 with those who consider themselves on the philosophical side more, and see how their philosophical beliefs differ. But that's, I mean, if somebody asked me this, I would think like a year for myself to think about that. So yeah.
Well, I think we still have
Okay,
David
that's-
and-
Can I add to this something that might be useful
Okay,
or relevant?
to the point, please.
Regarding the question that you were to go and look for influences or traces, influences or similarities. I think it has been actually done. There are tools for this. Digital historians at the Helsinki University have come up with, they cooperate with techies and all the computer people. So they're able to apparently, they have a system who can detect the paragraphs that are similar. So they can build entire trees without presupposing any direct or known influence. So they're actually quite advanced in this. What we can get out of it, I don't know, but it seems that they've done it. So Mikko Tolonen is the head of the.
And then we go David next. Again.
Okay, just very general. So you asked all of us, so where we think that you should take your research next. I really agree with Jouni-Matti. I really am all in favor of practical turn. If I have anything to add to it, I would say it would be nice to look into really some papers doing really the groundwork or the legwork of in philosophy, on historiography of medieval thought or medieval philosophy, because I think that's also very overlooked. You know, I remember reading a paper that was basically focusing on one letter by Gebert of Aurillac, simply focusing on one letter, which was basically answer to a question of his friend about the practice of timekeeping in 10th century, you know, to how to compute time zones and how to work with this computation. And probably it was answer to some very specific, very complex question, but we also have a zero knowledge of 10th century timekeeping. So basically from this letter, which is actually answering to the very specific question, you need to deduce or to somehow infer the entire knowledge of 10th century timekeeping. And that's also very interesting exercise where you utilize both your knowledge of the historical contents and your knowledge of modern astronomy and other philosophical suppositions. So this is also something which I think should be examined and inquired into very much. And I think it's often overlooked for these big cases of you know, big narratives of medieval philosophy and important figures. And I think this legwork and groundwork is overlooked. So, and I would really love to learn or read something about these small cases in general. Also, I think in philosophy of historiography you can read a lot of good insights into how to write even intellectual history. I think it's often the, you quoted Collingwood. I think, and he was archaeologist, but he was also writing a lot about intellectual history. And actually, he didn't saw a difference between doing intellectual history or historiography of philosophy and doing, for example, archaeology. He considered it all to be historical sciences, and I'm really all in favor of this idea. So, but I agree with the practical turn, and as Joni Matti said, but I also had to go into the legwork, look into these, forgotten papers, forgotten people, and these very basic inferences which are meant to establish theory from the ground. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there any more comments, questions, criticism, concerns, whatever? All right, do you want to say something? You have the last word, Julita.
I have the last word. I think that the discussion is really impressive, and I am bringing out more than I expected, actually. So the dissertation has been through several rounds of reviews and stuff like that, and publications, and yeah, I never felt like I had particular suggestions, something substantive to take out. So this time I really do. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you again for speaking with us. I think
Thank you.
all of us in the center, it was very interesting, and I think there's a lot of interest, and we should definitely continue discussing it. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Julita. And as I said before, everybody will see you after the summer with our seminar. Bye-bye.